Yay. Hello, everybody. I am Andi Kinsey. Andi like Gandhi, but without the G, and welcome to the Kicking the Bucket live stream. So I see we have a couple of viewers here already. Welcome. I'm so glad you could be here today. I want to tell you a little bit about Kicking the Bucket before we jump in. So Kicking the Bucket is a fiction podcast. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it's not interviews. So it's not people talking back and forth like what we're doing right now. It is an immersive story. So it's like has a soundscape for your ears. And it is a dramedy. That means you're going to laugh and cry. We are premiering on July 2nd. So this live stream that's happening right now, if you're listening to it before July 2nd, the show has not premiered yet. July 2nd, that's when we premiere the podcast. Regardless, please visit our website because that's where you can find all things Kicking the Bucket. It contains a link to the show, our newsletter, socials, replays of these live streams. So what is the point of these live streams? The point is that they are like bonus content for the show, the story. And today I'm very excited to welcome Clayton Stromberger, who is the outreach coordinator with UT Shakespeare at Winedale. Welcome, Clayton.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. We go way back. So I'm going to start off with some questions with Clayton. So also if you want to contact anybody, afterwards, see the link at the bottom of this stream. Those have the URLs. You can get to the Kicking the Bucket podcast, and you can also get to Clayton's program, Shakespeare at UT Shakespeare at Winedale. So Clayton and I go way back. Like we both work with youth and Shakespeare. And can you give us tell us a little bit about yourself, Clayton? Like, what's your story? How did you get involved with Shakespeare?
Yeah, so I was started out as a journalist in high school and college and had absolutely no interest in Shakespeare and knew very little about it. And then I heard about a course, the Shakespeare at Winedale class at UT. So this was in the early 80s. A friend of mine, David Weiser, had taken the class and said it was fantastic and life-changing. And when he talked about it, he got a far-off look in his eyes. So I thought, okay, maybe I better check this out. So I did the summer class in 1983 and really came out there not knowing much about the plays. I'd read them, but they didn't really make sense to me. And then, we were assigned a part in each of the three plays. And through that process, I began to, through playing the plays as part of an ensemble, I began to kind of go, oh, I see how these work. And so that was kind of a transformative experience for me. I ended up segueing from that into starting a theater company with my friend Monica Regan, and we did several productions, 7 in Austin, including Measure for Measure, and then began doing Shakespeare with young people on a grant-funded basis, and then transitioned to classroom teaching in the elementary school, doing Shakespeare with those students, then started bringing those students out to Winedale to perform. So these were 4th and 5th graders at Blackshear Elementary, and I started bringing them out in late 90s. And out of that, Dr. Ayers, the founder and our teacher at Shakespeare at Winedale at that time, had the idea for an outreach program for Shakespeare at Winedale. So that's how I ended up doing this job. James Lowland took over the program in 2000. And so sort of Doc's idea, James helped to bring it into reality. And then we were able to create the position in 2003. So since then, I've been basically traveling to different elementary schools around Central Texas. And the idea is it's kind of a smaller version of the Shakespeare at Winedale program. Obviously, we can't spend the summer out at Winedale, but the kids work maybe an hour a week on a scene, and then by the end of it, they do a performance out at Winedale. So it's Shakespeare through performance, and the kids are mostly 4th and 5th graders. So that's what I do now.
I love it. So I you know how they say write what you know. So working with
Uh-huh.
Shakespeare and youth, and adapting some of the scripts for younger audiences, I feel like Shakespeare was my writing teacher. And so Shakespeare has a strong influence in this story of Kicking the Bucket, because
Right.
Dolores, our main character, is a retired Shakespeare professor. So
Yeah.
she has a lot of um, like quotes. Like she comes up with quotes, you know, life
Right.
related quotes throughout most of the story, and each episode has a Shakespeare inspired title. And
Right.
so, but Shakespeare is like a huge master of death almost. So, can we get into, you know, talking about Shakespeare and death? How did
Yeah.
Shakespeare think about death? Was it something noble, terrifying, absurd?
Yeah. All of the above, I think. um, yeah, I was just reviewing. I asked my students to write a little reflection paper about what they learned at the end of the year, and I was looking through some
You're talking
from.
about the young students, or you're talking
Yeah,
about
so the 9 and 10-year-olds, and one of them wrote, "I learned Shakespeare likes to write about death. In every play we worked on, somebody dies." Um, which I guess we were doing Hamlet and Macbeth, and but um, yeah, when you invited me to come and talk about this, first I just want to say I'm not really a Shakespeare scholar, but I've spent a lot of time exploring the plays through performance. Um, and the students I work with, we've done a whole range of plays, not ranging as you have with your young students. Ranging from Midsummer to King Lear this year, Richard III, Henry IV. So we're always coming across death in those plays, and um, as I thought, for example, the plays we're doing this summer, the summer class is doing out at Winedale. Um, Death is a huge part in all three of them. So Richard II, King Lear, and Twelfth Night. Now, Twelfth Night's a comedy, but it's sort of haunted by various deaths and the fear of Viola's brother having drowned. So it seems like you can't go far in any of the plays without bumping into death in some form, and it's either absurdly comic, as in Pyramus's death in Midsummer Night's Dream and the Pyramus and Thisbe play, or heartbreaking. So there's just so many, like any of the subjects he loves to examine. It seems like he looks at it from so many different angles that there's an. I looked up on ShakespeareWords.com, this really great site that the Crystals have created. Like how many times the word death was used. I think I came up. It looked like 890. Um, and I think life had maybe 800 or something. So, yeah, it pops up everywhere.
do you feel so? Of course, death was more common back then. We have a comment about yay for theater for young people. So young people, I feel like they have not been influenced by society. It feels like we were talking last week about a lack of death literacy in our society
Oh,
nowadays.
yeah.
And because death was way more common, of course, in Shakespeare's times, was there a more pragmatic attitude? And do you feel like working with young people that there's a little bit of pragmatism when it comes to playing or performing the death? Because I too find like the kids really, they're like, everybody dies. They love it. The dramatic death.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the when you bring in a death scene, they just get so excited. um, yeah, it's funny. You know, I'm I'm torn sometimes because I'll start a play like King Lear and or Romeo and Juliet, and everybody's really getting into the characters, and then I think, gosh, at some point I'm gonna have to tell them how this ends. It's kind
Mhm.
of, but I do feel that I like the fact that it brings in the reality of death and into the classroom in kind of a safe way. Like we don't stop and talk about you know, I'm not a counselor, so we don't get into talking about death, but I think I would guess a lot of the reading material that kids are reading at that age are pretty safe and kind of, you know, I mean, I think about growing up with PBS Kids and kind of the world of, you know, happy kind of bouncy characters. Nothing bad ever happens to them. So the kids are definitely intrigued by it and sort of fascinated, and you know, some of them are really drawn to the dramatic death scene. So I had one group of students, fourth graders, who did the final section of Romeo and Juliet where they die, and you know, they were really the little kid who played Paris. His death was very dramatic, and they weren't hamming it up. You know, they were very committed to it, and so it's kind of, you know, there's something sort of beautiful about the way they look at it and try to explore it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat about humor and death.
Right.
In some ways, I feel like the students help us think about it in a more lighthearted manner because, like you said, they take it very seriously, but it's also they're committed to it. But there's also like almost like a relief, a lighthearted relief in being so committed. You're like, oh, you did it to the fullest, and there's joy in that, I find sometimes. What do you think about like the
well,
humor
it's like
and death?
well, I think, you know, there's always the humor pops up in weird moments, like in Mercutio's death speech. I had a third grader who wanted to do that speech 2 years ago, and I guess he'd seen it in the film, and you know, they get the kids I've worked with on that speech, they love the fact that he stops to crack some jokes while he's dying, you know. And he just can't help himself, and Shakespeare can't either. So yeah, and when you're working on a play and performance, you know, you sometimes don't have a sense of how the audience is going to respond, and then all of a sudden they bust out laughing at something that seems very serious. And you know, I remember a friend of mine, they did the Scottish play at Winedale, and they were all shocked that people laughed when Banquo's ghost came in, because they wanted it to be very dramatic, but it was also funny, you know. The table's full. No, there's a place reserved. Where? Here. And there's this guy sitting there with blood all over him. So yeah, I definitely think there are moments of dark humor that pop up. And we had a group of students. We did the scene in King Lear where Gloucester decides he's going to end his life, and so he comes to the edge of what he thinks is the cliff, and this group of students just loved that scene, and they all wanted to be the ones who went, and then he falls, kind of is unconscious for a little bit, and then he wakes up and he's like, what happened? I'm still here. So they loved that there was a dark humor in that, you know, he's trying to kill himself and it doesn't work, which I think is sort of a theme that comes up in Kicking the Bucket.
It's interesting how and I think maybe it does come directly from Shakespeare because, well, no, I think it's also personalities, but to me, the humor in those moments that are so heartbreaking is what makes them even more real. Like it connects me even more to my emotions at that time. And I know that we have a lot of media out there that is talking about end of life, but it's typically from a very sad perspective. Like it's a loss that is the focus, and as you just said in the speech when Mercutio is dying, like you can't have the tragedy without the comedy. Like you almost can't help yourself. So that was part of the reason why I wanted to bring some more humor into the story. But it's also human, right? The humor is part of it. So do you feel like since you were speaking about King Lear, and then also a really interesting parallel with the young people, because Lear is a lot of the story is about aging, right? So and kicking the bucket, these two characters are getting older. So what do you feel that King Lear teaches us about aging and dignity as you age and the differences between the generations, especially working with young kids doing it?
Yeah, we this group I worked with at Harrington Elementary, we did the scene where Lear awakens in Cordelia's camp, and it's very moving to ask, a 10-year-old to play someone who's 80 and exhausted, and so the main thing I was constantly trying to get them to do is just go very slowly, and let the words kind of do the work. But in performance, it was just so powerful because we had two students who were playing Lear, and they just got up so slowly from the bench, and looked at Cordelia, and methinks I should know this lady, and the feeling in that scene of forgiveness and acceptance is really powerful. And when he goes off and he says, I'm old and foolish. I can't remember the exact line, but forget and forgive. So I sort of felt, this is a good message for these kids to, like as a parent, you kind of go, okay, I'm not perfect, mess some things up there. Parents are always struggling with that. As kids, you're always, dealing with frustration with parents and appreciating some things about them, and other things frustrate you. So, we watch that relationship play out. We see Cordelia and Lear, smack heads in the first scene, and then anger and stubbornness, and then there's this kind of beautiful moment where all that just kind of falls away, and they're very human together and very gentle with each other. And so, to me, that's always such a key scene. And then later, when he's like trying to comfort her, like, no, we'll go off to prison together. It'll be okay. We'll talk about court gossip. And so in the end, he finally gets that like a real closeness with her, but he had to kind of go through all this horrible, anger and stubbornness and being a jerk to his other daughters. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it I don't know what the kids really think, if they're relating that to a grandparent or parents, how much they are, but I think it's really, those scenes really are kind of fascinating to explore for the kids,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have one viewer who is commenting on watching, being the right age to watch R&J, right? So, so it's also poetic when the young people get to do Shakespeare, when it is more directly related to them age-wise. But you can learn a lot from all of, the different characters and the different ages. For anyone who's just joining us now, I am talking with Clayton Stromberger, who is the outreach coordinator at UT Shakespeare at Winedale. So the links are right down there for a little bit if you want to find out more information. And we are talking about Shakespeare and death because they both play a big role in the Kicking the Bucket story, which premieres July 2nd. Can we start talking a little bit about these epic final monologues that the characters have? Because most people don't get to have an epic final monologue right before you die, right? So what do you think is the reasoning behind that? Or, to give these characters that final say? Is it really important to the story, or is it important to the humanness?
Well, I always think first that Shakespeare was an actor and he knew how fun those scenes were. So he was like, he's writing for his friends. So he's saying, I know he'll love this, But I was thinking about one of the plays the students are working on this summer with Madge Darlington, the interim director of Shakespeare at Winedale, is Richard II. And there's a great scene early in Richard II where Gaunt is fading and is frustrated with how Richard is running things and is summoning Richard like to try to talk some sense into him. And York says, Gaunt is proposing this idea to York, and he says, "Will the king come that I may breathe my last?" So like I need to get some words into him. And York says, don't bother, because it's all in vain. He's not listening to anybody. And then Gaunt says, "Oh, but they say the tongues of dying men enforce attention like deep harmony," which I thought was just a pretty great line. "Where words are scarce, they are seldom spent in vain, for they breathe truth that breathe their words in pain. He that no more must say is listened more than they whom youth and ease have taught to gloze. More are men's ends marked than their lives before. The setting sun and the music at the close, as the last taste of sweets is sweetest last, writ in remembrance more than things long past. Though Richard my life's counsel would not hear, my death's sad tale may yet undeaf his ear." So the idea that, I see the end coming, and suddenly that reality kind of prompts a new set of insight, a new set of words. There's when Hotspur dies in Henry IV, Part 1. He attempts to make, he's giving his final speech, but he doesn't complete it. He's right there with Hal, who's just killed him in battle. And let's see if I can find it here. He has that great bit where he says, "No, Percy," he's speaking to himself, "thou art dust and food for," and then he dies, and then Percy says, "for worms." So it kind of subverts the idea that you get to have this big dramatic speech. Hamlet's is very short. It just says the rest is silence, which is kind of the most profound. But yeah,
Hamlet did speak a lot throughout.
He did, yeah. He had already gotten a lot of his speaking done. And of course, Lear has his heartbreaking speech with Cordelia's body. And so, I mean, I think it's the emotional, ringer at the end that gets you. You got to have that. And there's something about the word, the words that can release that. That's that's not like in a film where you maybe have an image with music playing or something. But yeah, I was thinking about death in films, like death speeches, like the famous Blade Runner, with Rutger Hauer, where the tears will fall like rain or something like that. If you nail those moments, they become sort of indelible, and it becomes something people walk out of the play going, "Wow, that was intense."
Malcolm Gladwell says, like, you have to nail the ending, and if you nail the ending, it doesn't matter so much what happens earlier, because that's what the people walk away with. And then this reminds me of the conversation I had with Garrett Caldwell from Kitchen Table Conversations, because he was saying, that Yorick monologue is that he said, now you for in terms of your advanced planning, right, your end of life planning, he said it's a living kind of thing. You have to review those plans every year, because your view changes. He's like, you could be deciding for what you at 40 could be deciding for what you want to do, what you think your end of life should be like when you're 80. But when you're 70, when you're 80, what you want for your end of life might change. And so it's really interesting that there's this monologue in Shakespeare's works that says, no, like all of a sudden I have this different point of view now that I'm here. You know, it's Shakespeare can teach us everything.
Yeah. Yep.
So do you want to speak a little bit? Well, actually, we should be getting to our final thoughts. You could throw out anything. If you have any thoughts about how Shakespeare might feel about medical aid in dying, or just any other thoughts that you kind of want to share about Shakespeare and death before we start to wrap things up.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how you know, there are these final intense speeches where these characters see the end and are compelled to speak, but there's also the effect that death has that ripples through the play, and kind of the effect it has on other characters, the finality of it, to use the John Madden phrase. And at the end of Lear, you know, I know that part of what your story is about is not just the two people who are facing their end of life decision, but their children and the people around them, or their child. And I can't remember if they're two children. Yeah. But you know, the character of Edgar has these amazing lines after he's been there and basically watched Lear die right in front of him, and just watched his father die earlier, you know, not too much further back in the play, Gloucester. It's sort of out of nowhere, these lines in the play. He says, the weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. And then the last two lines, the oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. But that challenge of, and now we got to say what we really feel, which is so hard for us, you know. And I think being around friends who were, you know, facing the challenges of a terminal disease, you know, it's hard, because you want to say what you feel, but sometimes you also want to give that person space. So I think it's interesting to see characters in the plays grapple with, you know, not just the death of the character, but how do we respond to it and how do we talk about it?
Especially in a time when it was so prevalent, like we mentioned earlier, like death was very common for everyone at that time. And to still learn that it was hard even then, right? Even then, there was a struggle with how do you address it. So
even if it was more familiar, it wasn't easier to, you know, you still have to go through it yourself as a family member, or face it yourself. So a lot to dig into in the plays, and come out to Shakespeare at Winedale and see some of these plays. You can see King Lear and Richard II, the scenes we've been talking about, and out at Winedale. I think the performances starts July 22nd, I think. Let me check that. No, sorry, July 17th.
Okay, July 17th, and these are your youth that are performing?
No. So this is the summer. So every summer there's a group of 18 or so students, Shakespeare at Winedale, who live out at Winedale all summer and work on 3 plays. And they're being led by interim director Madge Darlington, and then our new director Katie Brokaw is coming in. Nice. So that's July 17th, Thursday through Sunday, for 4 weekends.
Huzzah!
Yeah.
Huzzah! So, do you think Shakespeare would be a fiction podcast writer if he lived now?
Oh yeah.
Or would he be on YouTube? He'd be like he'd be the non-stop content creator, perhaps.
Yeah. Whatever worked. Yeah, whatever kept his actors in good parts and paid for that house in Stratford, you know, that's the myth.
Ah, yes, he would have been able
to
figure
going.
out how to pay for things. Cool. Well, Clayton, thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us. If anybody would like to continue the conversation, jump on our socials. You can feel free to comment and ask questions there. You can get to our socials from that little website link down at the bottom. Yeah, so yes, there is agreement amongst the commenters that Shakespeare is a nonstop content creator and have good quips. So thank you all for viewing us. We're going to return in July. We're taking next week off, but returning in July, and July 2nd is the premiere of the podcast. So please go to the website, jump onto the podcast, your streaming platforms, follow, like, subscribe, all of that stuff. Thank you, Clayton.
Yeah.
We're going to sign off. So I'm going to say goodbye from my end. So glad to see everyone. We'll see you soon.
All right. Goodbye. Yeah. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for watching.